The moment I knew something was wrong, my daughter was already standing in her white dress, holding her flower basket with both hands, waiting for someone to tell her where to go. Another little girl stepped past her. No one explained it. No one even looked at her. I saw my mother across the room just for a second, and she looked away, like she hadn't seen us at all. That was the moment I understood whatever had been decided, it hadn't included us. But that came later. That morning had started the way good mornings do, quiet and ordinary, in a way that makes you trust the day ahead of you. It was a Saturday in early May, warm already by 9, the kind of Virginia spring morning where the light comes in, soft and steady, through the kitchen window. My daughter Piper stood on a chair in front of the hallway mirror, holding 2 ribbons in her hands, like they were something important. "Which one looks more like a wedding?" she asked. I leaned against the doorway watching her. "Let me see," I said. She held them up, one pale, pink, one white, both satin, both slightly wrinkled from being taken out and put back in her drawer more times than I could count over the past 2 months. "The white one," I said. "It matches your dress." She nodded serious, like she was filing that information away somewhere permanent. Piper was 6, and when she decided something mattered, she treated it that way. Today mattered. She was the flower girl at my younger brother Grant's wedding. She had been talking about it since February, practicing too, walking slowly down our hallway, holding her little wicker basket, turning carefully at the end so she wouldn't trip. There was a faint mark on the baseboard where she always pivoted, like a small record of how much she had cared about getting it right. "Can you tie it tight?" she asked, handing me the white ribbon. "I can," I said. I tied it into her hair, just above her ear, smoothing it down so it wouldn't slip. She watched me in the mirror the whole time, trusting me to make it right. "There," I said. "Perfect." She smiled, the kind that starts small and then spreads across her whole face. Behind us, my husband Evan was moving through the kitchen with the steady rhythm he always had on days that mattered. He'd already loaded the car, packed a cooler with snacks, made sure Piper's extra tights were folded neatly in her bag. He didn't make a big deal out of things. He just handled them. "We should leave in 10, he said, glancing at his watch. "It's about an hour to Richmond if traffic's light." "I'm ready," Piper said immediately, hopping down from the chair. She picked up her basket from the entry table, holding it with both hands, again careful not to tip it, even though it was still empty. She had filled it and emptied it so many times at home that the motion had become automatic. I grabbed my purse and did a quick scan of the house. The small things you always check before you leave: lights off, doors locked, nothing forgotten. "Do you think Uncle Grant will like my ribbon?" Piper asked as we walked out. "I think he's going to love it," I said. She nodded, satisfied. On the drive, she sat in the back seat, her knees pulled up slightly so the dress wouldn't wrinkle, looking out the window like she was trying to memorize everything about the day before it even started. I caught her eye in the rearview mirror once. "Are you excited?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "I've been practicing." "I know you have. I'm going to go slow," she added, "so I don't mess up." "You won't," I said. She believed me. Completely. The way kids do when you haven't given them a reason not to yet. We pulled into the church parking lot just before 11. The building sat on a quiet street, lined with old oak trees, white brick, tall windows. The kind of place that felt like it had seen a lot of family moments come and go. Evan parked, and Piper waited until the car stopped completely, before she moved careful, even in that small way. "Okay," I said, turning in my seat. "Let's go find Grandma and—" My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down at the screen. A text from my mother. "Come in through the side entrance. I need to talk to you first. Don't bring Piper yet." I read it again, slower this time. "Everything okay?" Evan asked, already reading my face. "My mom wants me to come in alone first," I said. Piper leaned forward between the seats. "Can I come?" "Just give me 1 minute," I told her, keeping my voice even. "Stay with Dad." "Okay, I'll be right back." She nodded without question, settling back into her seat, her hands still resting on the handle of the basket. I stepped out of the car, and closed the door behind me, the late morning air warmer than I expected. The side entrance was around the corner, a narrow path that led to a smaller set of doors near the fellowship hall. My mother was already there waiting. She was dressed for the wedding navy, blue hair set, posture, straight hands, clasped in front of her, like she was holding something together. "Hi," I said. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past me toward the parking lot, as if making sure Piper wasn't following. Then she took a breath. "I needed to tell you before you went inside," she said. Something in her tone made my stomach drop just slightly. "Tell me what?" She hesitated for half a second, then said it. "The flower girl. It's not Piper anymore." The words landed, but they didn't make sense yet. "What do you mean?" "Claire's niece is doing it," she said quickly. "It was decided a while ago. They just didn't want to make a big deal out of it." I stared at her. "Piper's been practicing for 2 months," I said. "I know," she said. "I know, honey. But it's Claire's wedding and she wanted someone from her side. It's already decided. Already decided." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sharp, yet. Not anger, just pressure. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. She shifted slightly, her expression settling into something practiced. "I'm telling you now," she said. "Before you go in. I just need you to be gracious about it. Everyone's here, both families, and today just needs to go smoothly." I looked at her for a long moment. "And Piper?" I asked quietly. "What am I supposed to tell her?" "She's young," my mother said. "She'll be fine. Let her enjoy the party. She can still wear the dress." The dress, the ribbon, the basket, all the things that suddenly meant something different. I took a breath, slow, steady. "Okay," I said. It didn't mean I agreed. It just meant I wasn't going to fall apart in the hallway. "I'll bring her in," I added. My mother nodded, relieved, in a way she didn't try to hide. "Thank you," she said. I turned and walked back toward the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my shoes, louder than it should have been. Evan was leaning against the car, Piper standing next to him, still holding her basket, still exactly where I had left her. She looked up when she saw me. "Are we ready?" she asked. I stopped a few steps in front of her. For a moment, I just looked at her, at the white ribbon in her hair, at the way she was holding that empty basket, like it mattered. I opened my mouth to speak and realized I didn't know how to start. I didn't tell her right away. For a few seconds, I just stood there, in the parking lot, looking at Piper, the way you look at something you're about to change without permission. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the basket still balanced carefully in her hands. "Are we going in?" she asked again. Evan straightened from where he'd been leaning against the car. He didn't say anything, but his eyes moved from me to Piper and back again, already reading that something had shifted. I walked the last few steps toward them. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can you show Dad your ribbon again? I don't think he got a good look at it." Piper brightened immediately, turning toward Evan, lifting her chin so he could see the white satin bow. "It matches my dress," she said. "It does," Evan said, giving it the full attention she expected. "That's a good call." She smiled, satisfied, and in that small moment, I felt the weight of what I was about to take from her settle more fully in my chest. I reached for Evan's arm and drew him a few steps away. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "They replaced her," I said. The words felt blunt and unfinished, like I hadn't figured out how to say them yet. "With who?" "Claire's niece," I said. "Apparently, it's been decided for a while. No one told us." Evan's expression didn't change much, but I could see the shift behind it, the way he filed things, measured them. "And Grant?" he asked. "He let Mom handle it," I said. "Today." Evan exhaled once slow. "Okay," he said. "So what do you want to do?" I looked back at Piper. She was tracing the edge of her basket, with one finger, absent-mindedly waiting. "I have to tell her," I said. "I'm not walking her into that room without her knowing." He nodded. "Do you want me there?" "Yes," I said. "Just stay close." We walked back toward her together. Piper looked up as we approached, reading our faces in the simple, direct way kids do. "Are we late?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "We're okay on time." I crouched down in front of her, so we were eye level. "Hey, Bug," I said. "I need to tell you something, okay?" She nodded immediately. The flower girl job changed a little bit. She didn't speak, but I could see her focus sharpen all her attention, moving toward what I was saying. "There's another little girl who's going to carry the basket today," I said. "She's part of Claire's family." Piper looked at me for a moment, quiet. "Did I do it wrong?" she asked. The question landed exactly where I knew it would. "No," I said quickly. "No, you did it perfectly. You didn't do anything wrong." She held my gaze, searching for something confirmation maybe, or just a place to put what she was feeling. Then why, she asked. I took a breath, because they decided they wanted someone from Claire's side to do that part. I said, "It doesn't have anything to do with you." She looked down at the basket in her hands. "So I don't get to carry it?" "Not this time," I said. She nodded once slow, like she was agreeing to something she hadn't chosen. "Can I still go in?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "We're still going to the wedding. Can I still wear my dress?" "Yes." She thought for another second. "Okay," she said. That was it. No tears, no raised voice, just acceptance. The kind that sits too quietly to be comfortable. Evan reached down and squeezed her shoulder. "Hey," he said lightly. "You still look like the best-dressed person here." She smiled a little at that. We walked toward the entrance together, Piper between us. The main doors were open now, guests moving in and out, voices low, the sound of an organ drifting from inside. As we stepped into the hallway, I saw it almost immediately. A little girl I didn't recognize stood near the front, holding a small wicker basket, almost identical to Piper's. She wore a white dress with a pale blue sash. Her hair curled. A woman crouched beside her, adjusting the ribbon on her wrist. Piper saw it too. She didn't stop walking. She just slowed slightly, her eyes fixed on the basket, then lifted her gaze to the girl, then back to me. It was a quiet sequence, but it said everything. "That's mine. That's what I was supposed to do." "Oh." She reached for my hand without looking away, and I took it. We kept walking. No one stopped us. No one said anything. Across the room, I saw my brother Grant for the first time that morning. He stood near the front pews, talking to someone from Claire's family, smiling relaxed, like the day was unfolding exactly the way he wanted it to. For a second, his eyes moved in our direction. They passed over Piper, over me, then back to the conversation he was already having, like we weren't something he needed to deal with yet. I felt the pressure in my chest again, heavier this time, but still contained. Not anger yet, just something building. "Where do we sit?" Piper asked softly. "Right up here," I said, guiding her toward a row halfway down. We took our seats. Piper set the basket carefully at her feet, as if it still had a purpose. The music shifted, signaling that things were about to begin. I folded my hands in my lap and stared straight ahead, aware of my mother, somewhere behind us, of my brother, at the front of a room full of people who had no idea what had just been taken away in the hallway outside. I told myself the same thing she had. Just get through it. Just let the day go smoothly. But as the first notes of the processional began, I couldn't stop thinking about the words my mother had used. Already decided. Piper didn't cry. That was the part I kept waiting for, even after we sat down halfway up the aisle and the prelude music began to rise through the church like something calm and polished and entirely unrelated to the three of us. She just sat there, with her hands folded in her lap, ankles crossed, the way I had taught her for pictures, her flower basket tucked neatly beside her shoes, as if she still had some official reason to be holding it. Children don't always break where you expect them to. Sometimes they just go very quiet. Evan sat on Piper's other side, one arm stretched along the back of the pew behind her, not touching just there. I was grateful for that. He had a way of being present, without crowding anyone, and right then, that felt like the only kind of kindness I could manage. At the front of the church, the usher finished seating the last of the guests. A woman in a navy dress I didn't know crossed the aisle, carrying a toddler who clearly belonged to Claire's side of the family. People smiled at them. Programs rustled open. Somewhere behind us, someone whispered that the flowers looked beautiful. I looked down at the folded ceremony program in my hand for the first time. I almost missed it. The print was small, cream paper, dark blue lettering, Grant and Claire's names centered at the top. Beneath the wedding party, it still read, Flower Girl, Piper Bennett. I stared at it for a second too long. It wasn't proof of anything larger yet. It didn't tell me when the decision had changed, or who had forgotten to fix the programs, or whether anyone had even thought about it. But it told me one thing clearly. At some point, close enough to the wedding, for this to be printed, my daughter had still been part of the plan. And now she wasn't. I folded the program once carefully and set it in my lap. Piper noticed the movement. What's that? She asked softly. The program, I said. Does it say when Uncle Grant comes out? In a minute. She nodded and looked forward again. Then, after a few seconds, she leaned a little closer to me. Am I supposed to hold the basket here? She whispered. The question was so practical it nearly undid me. No bug, I said, keeping my voice level. You can just leave it by your feet. Okay. She bent down and adjusted it, so it stood upright, the white ribbon still tied to the handle. She had picked that ribbon herself this morning. It suddenly seemed like the kind of detail a person could remember for years, whether they wanted to or not. The processional began. First the grandparents, then the bridal party, one pair at a time, moving slowly down the aisle under the high wood beams and stained glass light. Then the little girl with the pale blue sash, the one we had seen in the hallway, stepping carefully, with petals in her basket, watched and admired by a room full of people who had no reason to think anything about it was strange. Piper watched the whole thing, not with jealousy, not even with anger, just with a kind of still concentration, as if she were trying to understand the rules of a game that had changed after she'd already learned them. When the girl reached the front, Piper's hand slid across the pew between us until it found mine. I took it immediately. I did not look at my brother. I knew where he was. I could feel the fact of him standing up there in his dark suit, waiting for his wedding to continue on schedule, while my daughter sat in the middle of the church, holding all the pieces of a role that had been taken away from her. Halfway through the opening prayer, Piper leaned toward me again. I would have gone slow, she whispered. I pressed her hand once. I know, I said. That was when I realized the thing that hurt most wasn't that she'd lost the moment. It was that she had come ready to do it well, and someone had decided that didn't matter. By the time the ceremony ended, my face hurt from holding it still, not smiling exactly, just composed in the particular way women and families learn to be when something is going wrong, and everyone around them has silently agreed that this is not the moment to mention it. The recessional began bright and orderly, and people stood to watch Grant and Claire walk back down the aisle as husband and wife. Applause rose around us, soft at first, and then fuller, warm enough to fill the church. Piper stood when everyone else did her little white shoes, lined neatly against the hem of her dress, her basket still by her feet, until Evan bent to pick it up for her. She took it from him automatically, as if the habit of carrying it was stronger than the fact that it had never been needed. Do we clap? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. She clapped. 3 small, careful claps, serious and polite. That nearly broke me more than anything else had. We were funneled out with the rest of the guests into the side garden beside the church, where family photos were being organized before everyone drove over to the reception venue. The sun was higher now, the late morning warmth settling over the brick paths and trimmed hedges. Someone from Claire's side was handing out bottled water. Someone else was corralling grandparents into the shade. The whole thing moved with the usual wedding efficiency, and that made it worse. There was no visible place for hurt inside a schedule like that. Piper stood close to me while the photographer called names. She did not ask again about the flower girl role. She just watched. Grant was at the center of everything now, his tie loosened slightly, one hand resting at Claire's back, smiling for cousins, smiling for aunts, smiling for the photographer. He looked comfortable in the way people do when the day is going according to plan. My mother moved through the crowd with that same controlled energy she always had at family events, adjusting people by inches, smoothing fabric, redirecting conversations before they became anything inconvenient. Twice, I caught her looking toward me, not warmly, not apologetically, just checking whether I was going to behave. A few feet away, Claire's niece, the little girl with the pale blue sash, was having her picture taken with the basket. Her mother knelt beside her, fixing a curl that had come loose near her temple. The girl looked happy, which wasn't her fault. She had no part in any of this, beyond being placed where she was told to stand. Piper saw her too. I could feel it in the way her hand tightened around mine. Then Mrs. Calhoun, an old family friend of my parents, who had known Grant and me since childhood, stepped up beside us, with her reading glasses still pushed up on her head. "Well now," she said, with the bright confusion of someone noticing a mismatch she assumed had an easy explanation. "I thought Piper was the flower girl. Didn't the program say that?" For half a second, no one said anything. It was the first time someone had said it out loud. I felt my mother's attention land on me from across the garden before I even looked up. Piper tilted her head slightly, listening. I kept my voice even. The plans changed. Mrs. Calhoun blinked. "Oh, well." She looked from me to Piper, then to the other little girl with the basket. "I see." She didn't, not really. But she understood enough to know there was nothing harmless about the question she'd just asked. "Well," she said gently to Piper, "you certainly look beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you," Piper said. Mrs. Calhoun touched my arm once lightly, then moved away. That should have been nothing. A small exchange. A passing comment. Instead, it sat in me like a stone. Because now there were witnesses. Not to the whole thing. Not to the conversation outside, or the timing, or the silence that had come before, but to the surface of it, to the visible mismatch, to the fact that this was not some private hurt that existed only because I felt too much. The photographer called for immediate family, and I heard my name. I looked down at Piper. "Come with me," I said. She nodded and came, still holding the basket. I almost told her to leave it on the bench, but I didn't. Something in me couldn't bear to be the one to take it away. By the time we reached the reception, I had stopped expecting the day to correct itself. That was the strange thing about humiliation, when it came wrapped in flowers and good manners. At first, part of you kept waiting for someone to notice, enough care, enough step in and say there had been a mistake. But by early afternoon, after the church photos and the careful smiles and the drive across town to the old brick hotel Claire's parents had booked for the reception, I understood something more useful. No one was coming to fix it for me. The ballroom was on the second floor, all tall windows and polished wood floors with round tables, dressed in white linen, and centerpieces of peonies and eucalyptus. A jazz trio played near the far wall, while servers moved between tables with trays of iced tea and champagne. It was elegant in the deliberate, expensive way weddings often are when one family is trying very hard to prove something to another. Piper stood beside me, just inside the doorway, still holding the basket. "Do I need this in here?" she asked. I looked at it. The little wicker handle, the white ribbon she had chosen that morning, the empty inside. "No," I said gently. "Not while we eat." She nodded and let me take it. I set it on an empty chair at our table beside my purse, and for a second, my hand stayed there longer than it needed to. It felt too much like putting something away. Our table was near the back, close enough to see the dance floor, but far enough that no one had placed us among the people who would be photographed most often. My mother was already seated 2 chairs down from where my father sat. Thomas Bennett had always had a talent for appearing to be part of a room without trying to command it. He was 65 now, broad-shouldered, in the way men who have done physical work for decades often remain even after they've slowed down. He owned Bennett Home Repair, the family business he had built from one truck and a borrowed ladder when I was in elementary school. He looked up when we approached. "There she is," he said to Piper, and his voice softened, the way it always did for her. "You look beautiful, kiddo." Piper gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Grandpa." He noticed the chair beside mine, the basket sitting on it, instead of in her hands. I saw his eyes rest there for a second, before lifting to my face. He didn't ask. Not then. That was almost worse than if he had. During dinner, the room settled into the usual rhythm of a wedding reception. Glasses, clinking forks against plates, laughter rising and falling in pockets. Grant moved from table to table, with Claire thanking people for coming, leaning in for photos, accepting compliments, like he had spent the whole day doing exactly what a groom was supposed to do. At one point, he stopped at ours. "Everybody doing okay?" he asked, smiling in that practiced, easy way he'd had since high school, the one that made teachers forgive late assignments and neighbors offer second chances. Evan gave him a polite nod. I said, "We're fine." Piper looked down at her dinner roll. Grant rested a hand on the back of my chair for half a second, just enough to suggest warmth, without actually offering anything that might require a response. "Good," he said. "I'm glad." Then he was gone, moving on to the next table, the next smile, the next safe conversation. I watched him cross the room and felt something inside me settle into place. Not peace, something harder. I was done helping him look like a better man than he had been today. That thought didn't come with a plan attached to it. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't mean I was about to stand up and interrupt the first toast, or pull Claire aside, or force some public reckoning. It was quieter than that. It was a line, a private one. But once I felt it, I knew I wouldn't be able to step back over it. Piper had just finished telling Evan that the mashed potatoes were good, but not school good, when I noticed my father still watching the room rather than eating. Not staring, just observing the way he always had when he was trying to understand something before speaking on it. Then Mrs. Calhoun passed our table on her way back from the bar and paused again, this time closer to my father than to me. "Well," she said in a low voice that wasn't quite low enough, "I do have to say, I was surprised about the flower girl switch. That little one of yours looked ready." My father turned his head slowly. "The switch," he said. Mrs. Calhoun looked at me, then at him, as if realizing belatedly that she had walked into a room she hadn't meant to enter. "Oh," she said, "I just assumed you knew." My mother's fork touched her plate with a sharper sound than it needed to. "Dottie," she said tightly, "I'm sure there was just some confusion." But my father was no longer looking at Mrs. Calhoun. He was looking at the basket on the empty chair beside me, then at Piper, then at me. It wasn't anger in his face. Not yet. It was recognition. He didn't say another word through the salad course. He didn't ask a question. He didn't make a scene. But something about him had gone still, in a way I had learned over the years to take seriously. My phone buzzed just as the servers began clearing plates for the main course. I glanced down beneath the tablecloth. A text from my father. "Can you step outside for a minute, back terrace? Alone." I read it twice. Then I lifted my eyes and found him already looking at me from across the table. He gave the smallest nod. For the first time all day, I had the unmistakable feeling that someone else in this family had finally stopped pretending not to see. The back terrace was half-shadowed and almost empty, just a stretch of brick overlooking the hotel garden, where boxwoods ran in straight lines, and a small fountain pushed waters into the warm afternoon air. My father was standing near the railing with his jacket unbuttoned, one hand resting flat on the stone ledge. He turned when he heard the door close behind me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Inside, I could still hear the softened blur of the reception. The band, shifting into something brighter, glasses clinking, the room moving on without us. "You wanted to see me?" I asked. He looked at me the way he always had, when he was trying to get all the way to the truth before he spoke. It was one of the reasons people trusted him with their houses, their keys, their cracked foundations, their half-finished disasters. He never rushed to the easy version. "What happened with Piper?" he asked. I could have given him the short answer. Claire changed her mind. Grant let Mom handle it. Piper got replaced. Instead, I told him the whole thing. The side entrance, my mother's face, the words already decided, the other little girl with the basket, the program that still had Piper's name on it. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he looked out at the garden for a long moment. "I thought something was off," he said finally. "Your mother told me there had been a last-minute adjustment. That's not what this was." "No," I said. "It wasn't." He nodded once slow. "Your brother has spent a long time letting other people carry the uncomfortable part of things," he said. "And your mother has spent a long time calling that peace." I leaned back against the stone wall, my arms folding automatically across my middle. "That sounds about right." He glanced at me. "You sound tired." "I am tired. Not dramatic tired. Not wedding day tired. Something older than that." He looked down at his hands for a second, then back at me. "I made a decision 3 weeks ago," he said. "And I signed the papers on Thursday. I waited. You know I've been moving towards stepping back from the company," he said. "Not all at once, but soon." I nodded. Bennett Home Repair had been the center of our family's practical life for as long as I could remember. Trucks invoices, permit folders, calls at dinner, weather delays, payroll Fridays. Even when we weren't talking about it, it shaped things. I'd planned, he said, to start transferring more control to Grant after the summer. Operations first, then the townhouse on Grove Avenue once the lease turned over. I assumed it was time. I stared at him. The townhouse was the best rental the company owned. Newly renovated, walkable to everything. The kind of place Grant had mentioned more than once in the past year, as though it was already waiting for him. My father's voice stayed level. "I changed that plan." I didn't speak. "I'm not handing responsibility to a man who let his mother tell his sister that her little girl had been removed from a wedding role after months of preparation," he said. "And I'm not rewarding someone for avoiding a hard conversation just because he knows other people will clean it up." The words didn't feel explosive. They felt heavier than that, settled. "He's going to say this is about one wedding," I said. "He can say whatever he likes," my father said. "It isn't about one wedding." He looked at me fully, then, not past me, not around me. "It's about a pattern," he said, "and I'm done pretending not to see it." Something in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. I had spent so much of the day trying not to overstate what had happened, trying to keep it in the category of disappointment instead of insult, misunderstanding instead of dismissal. Hearing someone else name it, plainly, did something I wasn't prepared for. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He exhaled through his nose, almost a humorless laugh. "I haven't decided all of it," he said. "But I know this much. I am not sitting back down in that room and letting everybody act like nothing happened." I looked toward the terrace doors. Inside was my mother, my brother Claire, the guests, the carefully arranged centerpieces, the choreography of a wedding reception already in motion. "You know Mom's going to say, 'This isn't the time,'" I said. He gave a small nod. "Your mother believes the right time for truth is whenever it causes the least inconvenience." I almost smiled at that despite myself. Then he straightened, buttoned his jacket, and looked back at the door. "I'm too old to keep confusing silence with kindness," he said. And for the first time all day, I believed the next part of this story was not going to belong entirely to Grant. When we walked back into the ballroom, nothing had changed. That was the first thing I noticed. The music was brighter now, a swing rhythm that made the room feel lighter than it should have. Glasses were being refilled, plates were replaced, laughter moved in soft waves between tables. From the outside, it was exactly what a wedding reception was supposed to be. From the inside, it felt like standing in the middle of something that had already cracked. Evan looked up when he saw me return. Piper was sitting beside him, carefully, pulling apart a dinner roll, placing the pieces in a neat line on her plate. as if she needed something to organize. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. Yeah. It wasn't entirely true, but it was enough for now. My father didn't sit back down. Instead, he paused, just inside the room, letting the door close behind him, and stood there long enough for the nearest conversations to slow. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough for people to start noticing that someone wasn't moving with the flow of things. That had always been his way. He didn't interrupt rooms. He changed their center. Grant noticed next. He was halfway between tables, mid-conversation, with one of Claire's uncles, his body turned slightly outward in that social posture he wore so easily. When he saw my father standing there, something in his expression shifted, not alarm, not yet, but awareness. "Dad," he called lightly, stepping closer. "Everything good?" My father didn't raise his voice. "I'd like to say something," he said. That was all it took. The room didn't go silent immediately, but it began to. Conversations tapered off in small circles, then wider ones, until the sound of the band softened and stopped altogether. Someone near the back set their glass down a little too carefully. Claire straightened beside Grant, her hand tightening slightly around his arm. My mother was already watching her body angled forward, her expression composed, but alert in a way I recognized instantly. Control, or the loss of it. "I won't take long," my father said, his tone even almost conversational. "But I'm going to say this here, because I'm not interested in pretending it didn't happen." Grant's smile tightened just enough to be noticeable. "Dad, maybe we can," he started. "No," my father said, not sharply, but firmly enough that the word didn't invite continuation. He looked around the room, not scanning, not searching, just making sure he was being heard. "My granddaughter came to this wedding today. After spending weeks preparing to be the flower girl," he said. "She arrived and was told, without warning, that she would not be doing that role. No conversation, no courtesy, just a decision that had already been made." The words didn't land all at once. They moved through the room in a slow ripple. Grant shifted his weight. "It was a small change," he said, his voice controlled. "Claire wanted someone from her side. It wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be what my father asked." Grant hesitated. "A big deal," he finished. My father nodded once. "That's the problem," he said. There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. "Deciding something doesn't matter, doesn't make it untrue," he continued. "It just means you're comfortable with who it affects." Claire spoke, then her voice measured careful. "We didn't want to create unnecessary stress before the wedding," she said. "It seemed kinder to just handle it quietly." Kindness, my father said, would have been a phone call. No one moved. At the table behind us, someone shifted in their chair. Somewhere near the bar, a glass clinked against another, then went still. My mother stepped forward slightly. "Robert," she said under her breath, "this is not the time." He didn't look at her. "That's exactly why it is," he said. Grant exhaled sharply. "Dad, we can talk about this later. Not in front of everyone." My father finally turned his head toward him. "You've had weeks to talk about it," he said. "You chose not to." The room held that. It held the fact of it, the timeline, the choice. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a second, I thought he might apologize. He didn't. Instead, he said, "We were trying to keep things smooth." My father nodded. "And what you meant was," he said, "you were trying to keep yourself comfortable." That was the moment everything shifted. Not because anyone shouted, not because there was a scene in the way people usually imagine one, but because the version of the day that had been quietly agreed upon, easy, seamless, without friction, no longer existed. Claire's hand slipped from Grant's arm. My mother's posture stiffened. Guests looked at each other, not sure where to place their attention. And Piper, sitting beside Evan, looked up at my father with a kind of quiet focus I hadn't seen all day. She didn't understand everything that was being said, but she understood enough. My father stepped back then, just one step, as if he had set something down in the middle of the room and was leaving it there for everyone else to see. "I'm not asking anyone to change the schedule," he said. "I'm not asking for anything to be redone. I'm saying what should have been said before this started." He let the silence sit for one more second. Then he turned and walked back toward our table. The band didn't start playing again right away. And for the first time all day, the room no longer felt controlled. The room never fully recovered. That was the first real consequence. The band started again after a minute or two, but softer this time, as if the musicians themselves weren't sure what kind of evening they were playing for anymore. Conversations resumed in fragments. People lowered their voices. Laughter came later and thinner, and when it did, it sounded chosen. My father sat down across from me, as if he had merely returned from taking a phone call. He picked up his water glass, took one sip, and set it back down. My mother did not sit. She leaned toward him instead, one hand pressed flat against the tablecloth, her face arranged into the kind of tight composure that barely held together under pressure. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" she asked, in a low voice that still carried farther than she intended. My father looked at her calmly, saying something true. This was not the time. That seems to be everyone's favorite phrase today. My mother's mouth tightened. "You embarrassed him." "No," my father said. "He embarrassed himself. I just didn't help hide it." Grant appeared a moment later, not at our table exactly, but close enough to make it clear he had come with purpose. Claire followed half a step behind him, her posture straight, her expression controlled in a way that suggested effort rather than ease. "Dad," Grant said, keeping his voice down. "Can we talk outside?" My father dabbed at the corner of his mouth with his napkin and stood. "Yes." Grant looked at me then briefly, not apologetically, not angrily either, more like a man trying to calculate where the ground had shifted and whether anyone else had noticed. Claire didn't look at me at all. They moved toward the hallway, outside the ballroom, my father walking ahead of them this time, instead of following anyone else's version of the evening. I sat very still. Piper had finished with her bread and was now drawing a crooked line through condensation on her water glass with one fingertip. Evan glanced toward the doors, then back at me. "You want to go after them?" he asked. "No," I said. I surprised myself with how certain I sounded. For most of the day, I had been reacting, adjusting, absorbing, trying to keep Piper steady, trying to keep myself from becoming the problem everyone had already decided I would be. But somewhere between the terrace and my father, standing in the middle of that room, something had changed. I didn't need to chase this. For once, it was coming toward the people who had made it. "What are you thinking?" Evan asked quietly. I looked at the empty chair, where Piper's basket still sat beside my purse, the white ribbon hanging over the side like a loose thread. "I think I spent too much of today trying to protect people from the consequences of their own choices," I said. He nodded once. "Yeah, not agreement for the sake of agreement, just recognition." Across the room, I noticed Claire's maid of honor, a woman in her 30s with a copper-colored dress and the practical expression of someone who had managed logistics all weekend, speaking softly to one of the caterers while glancing toward the hallway. Then she crossed to the sweetheart table, picked up an envelope-sized folder I hadn't noticed before, and carried it toward the doors. A few minutes later, she came back without it. I didn't know what was in the folder. Seating adjustments, vendor paperwork, a timeline. It could have been anything, but the movement itself mattered. Things were being handled now, not socially, but structurally. Quiet conversations, closed doors, information moving. The reception no longer belonged entirely to appearances. My mother sat down at last, though not gracefully. She reached for her wine and missed the stem the first time. "This didn't have to become a spectacle," she said mostly to her plate. I looked at her. "No," I said. "It could have been a phone call." She turned to me sharply, and for 1 second, I saw the version of her she never liked to show, the one who believed order was the highest moral good, even when it cost someone else their dignity. "You are not the only person in this family," she said. "That's been pretty clear all day." Evan's hand closed lightly around my wrist beneath the table. Not to stop me, just to remind me where the line still was. My mother looked away first. When my father returned, Grant did not come back with him. That was the second consequence. My father sat down, folded his napkin once, and placed it beside his plate. "Everything okay?" I asked. He met my eyes. "No," he said, "but it's clearer." He didn't elaborate and I didn't push. A few minutes later, the MC announced the first dance. Claire appeared from the hallway, Grant beside her again. But something in his face had changed. Not collapse, not repentance, just the look of a man who had discovered that what he assumed was already his could in fact be withheld. As they moved to the center of the floor, Piper leaned toward me. "Are we staying?" she whispered. I looked at the dance floor, at my mother, sitting rigid, at my father watching, without blinking, at the basket still resting on the empty chair like a small white accusation. For a little while I said, "Because now I wanted to see what happened when no one rushed in to make things easier for him." We left before the dancing turned loud, not abruptly, not in a way anyone could have called dramatic. Piper was tired, which was true. The day had stretched too long for a 6-year-old in dress shoes. And by the time the first dance ended and the room began trying, politely and unevenly, to become a celebration again, she had leaned against Evan's side with that heavy, quiet children get when they're almost done holding themselves together. So we said our goodbyes. Or at least the version of goodbyes people manage when the room has already been split open and everyone is pretending not to feel the draft. Claire's mother hugged Piper and told her she looked lovely. One of Grant's college friends shook Evan's hand too firmly, as if that might somehow smooth over something he had only half understood. My mother kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Drive safely," with the brittle brightness of someone trying to put the furniture back where it had been before the storm. My father walked us to the hotel lobby. He bent down to Piper first. "You did very well today," he said. Piper looked up at him. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," he said. "You showed up." She seemed to think about that. Then she nodded as if he had handed her a piece of information she might use later. At the car, he touched my elbow lightly. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. I looked at him for a moment. "Okay." He gave Evan a brief nod, then stepped back. On the drive home, Piper fell asleep before we reached the highway. Her basket sat on the seat beside her, tilted against the door, the white ribbon catching the passing headlights in brief flashes. I watched it in the rearview mirror longer than I meant to. The next morning, my phone rang at 9:12. "Grant." I stared at his name for one full ring before answering. "Hi," I said. His silence was brief, but noticeable, the silence of someone who had rehearsed a beginning and then lost confidence in it. "I should have called you before yesterday," he said. I'm sorry, not yet." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He exhaled. "I know." I sat at the kitchen table while Piper ate cereal across from me in pajama shorts and one sock. The ordinariness of the room made his voice sound even more out of place. "Claire and I talked last night," he said. "And this morning." I didn't help him along. "We want Piper to still have a part today," he said. "A real one. Not just sitting with the family." I looked out the window over the sink. "What part?" "There's a short welcome at the start of the reception," he said. "Before dinner. Claire wants Piper to carry in a single flower and place it in the vase on the family table. Just one flower. It's simple. Nothing big." I said nothing for a second. Not because I didn't understand what he was offering. Because I did. It wasn't the role she had been promised. It didn't erase the church, the hallway, the basket, the way this whole thing had been handled. It was smaller than what she had lost, and both of us knew it. But it was also the first thing he had offered that required him to acknowledge out loud that something had been taken from her. "Does Claire want that?" I asked. "Or does Claire want this fixed?" He was quiet again. "Both," he said finally. That was at least more honest than most of what I'd gotten from him in the last 24 hours. "And Dad?" I asked. Another pause. Dad made some things very clear. I thought of his face during the first dance. Not ashamed exactly. Not humbled. Just newly aware that decisions made in comfort could still come due. "If Piper does this," I said, "no one changes it again. No last-minute adjustment. No new plan. No one tells her one thing and then another." "They won't?" he said quickly. Grant, I mean it. I let the silence stretch. Across from me, Piper looked up from her cereal. Was that Uncle Grant? Yes. Is he in trouble? I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. In a way, I said. Grant heard that. Nora, I'm bringing her if she wants to do it, I said. But I'm not selling it to her, like some magical replacement. It's not. And if anything changes again, we leave. It won't, he said. This time, I believed that he believed it, which was not the same thing as trust. When I explained it to Piper, an hour later, she listened with the same grave attention she'd brought to everything all weekend. So not the basket, she said. Number, just one flower. Yes, she considered that. Okay, she said. What kind of flower? That afternoon, at the reception hall, where the post-ceremony dinner was being held, the flower waiting for her was a white peony. Claire knelt down herself and handed it to Piper. Her makeup was flawless, her voice careful, her smile smaller than the day before. I thought this would match your ribbon, she said. Piper took the flower and looked at it seriously. It's bigger than I thought. Claire gave a short, quiet laugh. Yes, it is. Then she stood, and for a second her eyes lifted to mine. Not warm, not intimate, but direct. It was the closest thing to accountability I was going to get from her that day. When the music started and Piper walked in with the single peony held in both hands, she went slowly, exactly as she had always planned to go. Not for them, for herself. For a moment, the whole room watched her. And because everyone now knew enough to understand what that moment cost, no one mistook it for a cute detail. Grant stood waiting near the family table. His face changed when she reached him. He bent down and said something I couldn't hear. Piper nodded once, placed the flower in the vase, and came back toward us. The room applauded. Not wildly, not performatively, just enough. It wasn't justice, not all the way, but it was consequence made visible. And for the first time since the wedding had begun, my brother looked like a man who understood that what had embarrassed him was never my father's voice. It was his own character spoken aloud. The first Thursday, my father called Piper, answered on the second ring. She had been sitting on the living room rug with one of her coloring books spread open in front of her, a purple marker in one hand, and a line of crayons arranged by size beside her. When the phone lit up with Grandpa, she looked at me for permission out of habit, then picked it up before I could answer. Hi, she said, with the small seriousness she reserved for people she trusted completely. I listened from the kitchen while I dried the dinner plates. No grand speech, no attempt to rewrite the wedding, no careful adult version of what had happened. My father asked her about school, about whether the peony had lasted through the drive home, about the robin she had seen in our yard that morning. Piper told him the flower had drooped by bedtime, but she had put it in water anyway, because it still looked like it was trying. When she handed the phone to me 10 minutes later, her face was lighter than it had been in days. She says the flower tried, my father said by way of greeting. I heard. He was quiet for a second. Then he said I met with Grant on Monday. I leaned against the counter. And I told him what I told you on the terrace, he said. The transfer is off. No operational handoff this summer. No townhouse on Grove. If he wants responsibility, he can earn it the way everyone else does. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was surprised, because hearing it spoken plainly made it real in a different way. He argued, my father said. Then he blamed timing. Then he blamed stress. Then he got quiet. That sounded right. And Mom, I asked. A pause. She thinks I humiliated him more than necessary. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh, only without humor. And what do you think? I think he said that your brother spent too many years mistaking protection for love. That's on me too. I didn't answer right away. Across the room, Piper had gone back to her coloring book. She was drawing petals around a stick figure that was probably supposed to be a flower, and maybe also a person. With 6-year-old symbolism tended to happen by accident. My father's voice softened. How are you? It was such a simple question, but it landed differently now. Better, I said. Not all the way, but better. That became our pattern. Thursday calls just after 6. Some weeks, my father called to talk to Piper about birds, or the weather, or the tomatoes he was trying and failing to grow in containers behind the shop. Some weeks he asked me if I had a minute after she was done. Sometimes we talked about the company. Sometimes we didn't. Grant did call again 3 weeks after the wedding. This time he apologized first, not elegantly, not perfectly, but directly. He said he had spent too much of his life assuming I would absorb the awkward part of things. He said watching Piper walk with that single flower had made him understand, too late, what he had asked a child to carry, so he wouldn't have to carry discomfort himself. I believed he meant it. That didn't erase anything, but it mattered. My mother was slower. With her, the change was not dramatic. It was made of smaller things. Fewer instructions disguised as concern. Fewer assumptions that I would smooth over what everyone else preferred not to face. She did not apologize in the way I might once have wanted. But she stopped expecting me to help maintain the old arrangement, and I stopped volunteering. That was its own kind of peace. By late spring, Piper had a school music program. She wore a pale blue dress that had nothing to do with weddings and white shoes that pinched a little until she forgot about them under the stage lights. When her class filed out onto the risers, she stood in the second row, hands at her sides, chin lifted, waiting for the music teacher's cue. She looked calm, not because life had become fair, because she no longer looked like someone waiting to be chosen. Afterward, in the parking lot, she reached for my hand. "Did I do good?" she asked. "You did," I said. "You really did." My father, who had come straight from work in one of his clean button-down shirts, stood beside us with his truck keys in one hand. "You showed up," he told her. Piper smiled at that, like she remembered. On the drive home, I thought about the basket still sitting in the hall closet, the white ribbon looped through the handle exactly where she had tied it. I had never thrown it away. Maybe one day she would use it for something else. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it no longer felt like evidence, just an object from a day when the truth finally stopped being managed in private, and that I had learned was its own kind of inheritance. If you've ever had to decide between keeping the peace and telling the truth, I'd love to hear what that looked like for you. And if this story stayed with you, you can follow along for the next one. Sometimes, the quietest family moments leave the deepest mark.